this is what my 5 years of med school were like in 5 minutes or less. So there's a few things to clarify beforehand, but it depends on whether you're going undergraduate. So straight after school, you go into a 5 or 6 year degree versus postgraduate, where you do an undergraduate degree and then generally go into a 4 year course after that. As I mentioned in previous videos, there's a difference between medical school in Australia, where the point is to prepare you for an internship, which you're generally assigned. Whereas in the US, you go straight into your specialty and you're competing with everyone for those specialties. And it also depends if you are doing a 5 year university course or a 6 year course. As I mentioned, postgrad's 4 years, but the 6 year courses, I think, generally have that research year, which is mandatory or attached to that. All right, so the first and second year is where, I guess from my experience, I came from school, was working pretty hard at school, and then you get into this new environment where there's all this content you have to learn. You need to learn the basic sciences, anatomy, physiology, pharmacology, and you're learning all these niche things which you think, how are they actually relevant to me as a doctor? So like when you're in school and you're learning this complicated maths thing, and you're like, when will I use this in real life? That's basically like what the first year of med school is like. It's like, oh, this is the Krebs cycle and this is acetyl-CoA and all these random molecules. How will I use this in real life? You won't. Okay. But you need to know the basics to know the more advanced things. So there's a lot of content, there's a lot of learning, and it's generally based on campus, and there's lectures, workshops, classes. But when most people look back on it, these are the best times for med school for them because you're surrounded by your friends. I guess in Australia now, I guess based in Melbourne, where essentially as long as you pass like all the assignments, you'll get an internship job. So it doesn't have that, harsh, like competitive nature. And so you can, as long as you know your stuff, you can like take a lot of stress off from there. But it's just fun, like going into class, seeing your friends again, and then you can easily do something after. Whereas once you get to like hospitals and placements, everyone's split up, so it's a bit harder. So this is like when the social life is for a lot of people, taking off, and you're experimenting with all these new things, and it's completely different. You have like some autonomy, having finished school, so people are driving, or you can have a bit more freedom and enjoy it here. So people definitely have a life. Like some people work full time a different job in these years, but you can definitely work, definitely play soccer or like do hobbies. There's plenty of time for all those things. Yes, you need to like still do your due diligence and commit to your studies, but there's not many restrictions that I'd say for people in year 12 who are thinking about what it's going to be like next year. You can certainly manage all these things, and it's just like you just have to get better at time management rather than cutting things out. So I think I played club soccer years 1, 2, and 5. I've done tutoring throughout all 5 years. Always had, yeah, there'll always be like sometime during the week where I'll try and catch up with some friends. And so, yeah, I haven't really had to make many sacrifices with those departments across any year of medical school. Then you get to the clinical years, which is 3, 4, and 5. In years 3 and 4, this is a bit more about your learning. And so this is where people are super keen. Like, now I can actually apply the real life stuff in a hospital setting. So you're practicing taking a history from patients, practicing your examination skills, seeing some actual findings in real life, which is pretty exciting. It's cool to say like, listen to a heart murmur or like hear some crackles in the lungs and discover these things out for yourself. So this is where you basically become a bit of a detective, and you can sort of play the doctor role in a real setting, and it's good for your teaching too. And this is where your learning takes a more realistic approach. So rather than learning about the theory, you're learning about actual clinical conditions. What's the difference between an appendicitis, which is perforated, versus a ectopic pregnancy that's ruptured. And how does that present? What might you expect? And you see some clinical cases to back that up. Now, in year five, you're doing all these things. Like, certainly as a year five now, I need to do lots of work on my histories and examinations. I'm by no means like perfect. But I think the focus is rather you tend to repeat lots of rotations you've done before. And so the focus is on preparing for internship, which is slightly different. So there's jobs like making referrals, making phone calls, typing notes. This is generally the focus for the final years, and making that transition to internship smooth, how to be safe, how to prescribe things, rather than how to learn what pneumonia is and which antibiotics cover which bacteria. So throughout the course, your roles and responsibilities change, but we can generally divide this up into pre-clin, where you're surrounded with friends and you're doing lots of learning, and that's a bit more like school, and then clinical, which is probably a bit more like proper work. I'd say for those of you in clinical, try and enjoy yourself. Sorry, in pre-clin, try and enjoy that time with friends as much as you can. And then obviously with clinical, you have to like make the extra effort to catch up with people and organize that yourself. But in terms of the common rumors about what med school is like, particularly in Australia, I'd say, yeah, sometimes it is busy. Sometimes you can get 9 to 5. But even the busiest people, I think there's always time for relationships, friends, family, hobbies. All these things can be integrated in. And you don't have to sort of sacrifice these things. You don't have to quit. It depends on what hours you're working the job, but it's not something that you have to dedicate your whole life to. There's definitely room for plenty of balance in there as well. I'm happy to answer any follow-up questions you guys have, or dispel some other common myths or Q&As. But yeah, feel free to get in touch via the comments, and hopefully this was helpful for people considering getting into medical school or early on in their journey and wondering what it's all like. Thanks very much, guys, and I'll see you all next time.